I've always taken the midnight train home, finding solace in the quiet clatter of wheels on rails and the gentle hum of the empty car. At first, the solitude was a comfort, a daily retreat from the clamor of a demanding job and the chaos of city life. But about 3 months ago, everything shifted. That's when I first noticed him. Every night, without fail, I'd board the same train car, a dimly lit compartment with rows of worn seats, and settle into my usual window seat. In the far corner sat a man whose presence was as silent as it was unnerving. He always wore a battered fedora and a long, dark coat, even in the chill of November. His face was obscured by shadow, his eyes hidden behind reflective glasses that glinted under the fluorescent lights. I initially assumed he was simply a night owl, another weary traveler, but soon, subtle details began to disturb me. I first noticed that he never moved. No matter how many stops we passed, he remained fixed in that same corner, as if glued there. He didn't read or fidget. He merely watched the passing darkness beyond the window. One night, curiosity gnawed at me and I attempted a casual greeting. "Hey," I said softly, not wanting to startle him. "You take this route often?" There was no response. Only a slow, almost imperceptible shift of his head as if he were listening to something I couldn't hear. That small silence was the start of my descent into an unsettling obsession. Unable to shake the feeling that something was off, I began to piece together a puzzle from whispered rumors and fragmented local news reports. I learned that decades ago, there were whispers of strange disappearances on this very line. A commuter who vanished without a trace, another who left behind only a cryptic note about being followed by a shadow. At first I dismissed these as urban legends, mere echoes of the past, but the stranger's silent vigil seemed to breathe life into those ghost stories. Each night, as the train rumbled along its lonely track, I felt the oppressive weight of history and the unseen. Driven by a mixture of fear and fascination, I started to document my observations. I began keeping a journal, noting the time the stranger first appeared, the weather, even the background hum of the train's engine. I discovered that he always sat in the exact same seat in the same spot, even on nights when the train was unusually full. I overheard fellow passengers murmur about a ghost rider or a watcher from time to time, though they quickly dismissed it as the product of too many late hours and too little sleep. One particularly bitter winter night, the train was nearly empty, and I found myself alone except for that enigmatic figure. As I sat there, my eyes fixed on him, I began to notice details I hadn't before. His hands, resting in his lap, were strangely pale, almost translucent. The lines of his face, if they could be seen at all, were blurred and indistinct, like a figure fading in and out of focus. The carriage's overhead lights flickered intermittently, casting shifting shadows that made him appear and disappear like a trick of the light. In that moment, the rational part of me screamed that something was terribly wrong. Determined to confront my mounting dread, I decided one night to follow him with my eyes rather than words. I observed as he slowly stood and moved toward the end of the car. I followed his gaze and saw that he was staring intently at an unmarked door near the conductor's cabin, a door I had never noticed before. With a mix of trepidation and morbid curiosity, I approached it when he was out of sight. The door was slightly ajar, and behind it I glimpsed what looked like old photographs and yellowed newspaper clippings. The headlines spoke of mysterious vanishings and an accident on the very line I traveled every night. One article mentioned a spectral figure, a man in a fedora, sighting reported by witnesses just before a fatal derailment decades ago. My heart pounded as I pieced together the fragments, the eerie stillness of the man, the whispered legends of lost souls, and the grim fate of commuters long gone. I couldn't help but wonder if the man was not a living person at all, but a remnant of a tragedy that had been forgotten by time. That possibility sent shivers down my spine and made every journey feel like a precarious dance with the past. On the following night, the train's atmosphere felt charged with an otherworldly presence. I settled into my seat with trembling anticipation. As the train lurched into motion, I could feel an icy breath at the back of my neck. In the reflective surface of the window, I saw the stranger's silhouette looming impossibly close to me, though he remained seated at his usual spot. The lights dimmed further, and a profound silence fell over the car, a silence that swallowed every sound except for the faint, steady beat of my own heart. The climax came when the train unexpectedly halted in the middle of a deserted stretch of track. There were no announcements, no signals, just an eerie pause that lasted far longer than any scheduled stop. I felt compelled to rise from my seat, driven by a desperate need to understand what was happening. As I walked down the aisle, the door at the conductor's cabin creaked open wider. For a fleeting moment, I saw the stranger's reflection in the dark glass of that door, his eyes now unmistakably sad and pleading, as if trying to communicate a long-buried secret. In that suspended moment, I realized that this midnight commute was no longer just a means of travel. It had become a journey through the veil of time, where the living and the lost converged in a spectral dance. I retreated back to my seat, my mind racing with questions I could never answer. Had I just encountered a ghost from a forgotten disaster? Was I now part of an unsolvable mystery, bound to the fate of those who vanished in the night? When the train finally resumed its journey and the lights stabilized, the stranger was gone. I spent the rest of the ride in a numb daze, my thoughts swirling with the weight of the encounter. That night, I returned to my apartment with a heavy heart and a new understanding of the unseen forces that lurk in the shadows of our everyday lives. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't rid myself of the memory. I began researching local archives, combing through old records and speaking with anyone who might shed light on the mystery of that spectral commuter. Every piece of information I uncovered deepened the enigma, linking the midnight train to a series of unexplained events spanning generations. I discovered that many of the missing were never truly found, and their stories, like echoes in an empty station, continued to haunt the tracks. Now, each time I board that train, I do so with a wary respect for the past. I remain vigilant, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of the man in the fedora. The midnight commute is no longer a simple journey home. It's a reminder that sometimes the line between the living and the dead is thinner than we dare to imagine. And on quiet nights, when the train hums softly through the darkness, I sometimes catch a glimpse of that forlorn figure, a silent guardian or a tormented soul, forever bound to the tracks of a tragic history. The experience changed me. I learned that fear isn't always born from the unknown. It often hides in the details of our routine, waiting patiently for us to notice. And as I continue to ride the midnight train, I carry with me the haunting memory of that encounter, a reminder that some mysteries are destined to remain unresolved, lingering like ghosts on the edge of perception.